A lot of y'all be really lost in the sauce of heteronormativity. Don't worry, I'm gonna define it later. And you conflate sex and gender, and you automatically believe that how you are assigned your sex at birth should automatically be correlative or automatically equate to how you express your gender. When making this distinction between sex and gender, right? Sex refers to the biological differences between male and females, such as the genitalia and genetic differences. This is more about your chromosomes, more about your gonads. You feel me? That's more what sex is situated with. Gender, however, is much more difficult to define, but it can refer to the role of a male or female in society, known as gender roles. What we also know is that gender is not binary. Gender is not binary. Gender roles or an individual concept of themselves or gender identity. When it comes to thinking about the distinctions of gender and sexuality, it's important that we have a very intersectional understanding of how these two things are distinct. Because if we don't, we fall prey to literally making the word beautiful people have to go through bad shit for us to learn things. And I think that that is a privilege that a lot of us people that are outside of the LGBT community take for granted a lot. That we have the privilege of bumping our heads and messing over somebody else and literally not having to be held accountable because it's like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know. That's why we're doing this here lecture for. It's to make sure that when you lost in the sauce of trans homo negativity, you know exactly what you're doing and who you're doing it to. You know what I'm saying? Because what we know about gender and sexuality, especially when it comes to gender, we're going to get to it, is that these are social constructs. And this is the thing about social constructs, y'all. Pertaining to the society that we are talking about, they're going to have a different way that they construct gender. Here's an example. When we think about Africa prior to the European engagement, we know that there were different understandings of gender that made it where it wasn't seen as a binary. Another example, when we think about the Americas prior to European engagement, we know that many different tribes practiced that there were different various genders, right? So what we know about social constructs is that it's something that exists not objective to reality, but as a result of human interaction, as it exists because humans agree that it exists. That is literally the only reason why, right? And when it comes to thinking about, gender norms and social constructs, I want to be very clear. We have to stop conflating naturalization with normalization. And thinking that what has been normalized in society is what is actually natural in society. And I think that this is a lot of how discursive violence happens, is that you think that what has been normalized and what's been practiced for decades and centuries is actually what is natural. And this is what I mean by being lost in the sauce, right? You will become emotionally invested in some shit that is really empirically just false and wrong. But because you get a little bit of, sense of self, a sense of power, a sense of domination, and how society got you conditioned in this social construct, you will then try to justify it by marginalizing, demonizing, disavowing, disregarding people of the LGBTQ community, and that shit ain't real at all. You know what I'm saying? I think that if you claim to be an activist and especially if you're trying to be pro-black, you got to make sure your pro-blackness is not some shit that's structured within white supremacy that's just in blackface. You know what I'm saying? Nobody wants white supremacy in blackface. I promise you that. You feel me? Like, we, instead of having dire white supremacy, we rather had a real thing. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, make sure you ain't faking the phone. So I know a lot of y'all might be asking, consciously, you made a distinction between sex and gender, and you talked about how gender is a social construct. So a lot of you might be asking, is sex a social construct? Well, if you're asking that, the social construction of gender is a theory of feminism and sociology about the operation of gender and gender differences in society. Hey, to my pro-black people, I'm going to do a lecture specifically about the distinctions between black feminism and white feminism. But make sure that if you're really claiming to be a freedom fighter and you represent and respect black women, let's not disavow the entire literature base of feminism because you believe that white women did the shit, right? Like, I want to be very, very clear with that. Black feminism was literally structured and created out of criticism of white feminism and how white women were trying to push black women into these boxes. So I want to make sure I'm saying it right. But according to this view, in terms of this this feminine and sociology, studies, is that according to this view, society and culture create gender roles, and these roles are prescribed as ideal or appropriate behavior for people of a specific sex. And this is where I get into my bag about respectability politics, right? Usually I talk about respectability politics from a perspective of race. When I talk about how the mainstream white people particular want to make it where we always already appeal to their values, their morals, to their ethics, even if they wrong, even if we're trying to challenge their very morals and ethics. What I want to talk about very specific is that in that last slide, I'm also want to think about how respectability politics operate around gender and sexuality, and how respectability politics and literally what is known to be respectful or not respectful, how it operates in terms of gender performance as well as gender identity. Because we'll be planning ourselves if we only can think about respectability politics insofar as white supremacy and not think about how respectability politics is also structured in in heteronormativity and transphobia